Hello, my fellow travelers. Before we begin, I would like to express how much of a pleasure it is to live in the same era as you. The universe has existed for billions of years, and we are sharing this small moment together in the face of this immensity. So, let's take this opportunity and learn together. Today, we are going to embark on a profound and transformative journey to explore one of the most fundamental and intriguing concepts of the spiritual path, the Wheel of Samsara. This ancient doctrine, present in various esoteric and religious traditions, speaks to us about the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Through this guide, we will unravel the mysteries of the Wheel of Samsara, understand its essence, and, most importantly, discover how we can free ourselves from its grip. We will also address recent claims that this cycle has come to an end, and that we are about to enter a new phase of planetary evolution. Prepare yourself for a journey of self-knowledge and enlightenment. To understand the depth of what we call the Wheel of Samsara, we first need to dive into the spiritual foundations that shaped this concept. Samsara, as mentioned earlier, is a Sanskrit word that can be translated as endless cycle, continuous movement, or literally wandering. More than just a philosophical concept, the Wheel of Samsara touches the fibers of human existence and is a direct reflection of how we perceive life, death, and rebirth within the great universal fabric. The Wheel of Samsara is often illustrated as a cyclical process in which souls, enveloped in ignorance and desires, go through an almost endless repetition of cycles of birth, life, and rebirth. Insatiable desires, fleeting passions, and illusions keep this wheel in motion, sustained by what spiritual traditions call karma. But what really is the Wheel of Samsara beyond a symbol? To get to the answer, let's look at its structure, its origins in spiritual traditions, and the impact it has on how we view life. The origin of samsara in spiritual tradition. The concept of the Wheel of Samsara was born in the cradle of Indian philosophies, permeating Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and to a lesser extent, some branches of Sikhism. Although each tradition offers nuances in its interpretation, the core of the concept is shared. Existence in samsara is characterized by impermanence, suffering, and dissatisfaction until spiritual liberation is achieved. In Hinduism, samsara is the consequence of our separation from the universal truth, known as Brahman, the supreme and unchanging reality. While we are entangled by the veil of ignorance, avidya, we remain trapped in illusion, maya, believing that we are separate individuals in a world of dualities. It is this ignorance that fuels our desires, actions, and, consequently, rebirth. In Buddhism, samsara is defined as a psychological and existential prison, in which all things are transient and imperfect. Life in samsara is full of suffering, dukkha, one of the Four Noble Truths that Buddha taught as the foundation of his philosophy. For Buddhism, the cycle of rebirth is driven by thoughts, emotions, and actions that arise from ignorance around moha, attachment, lobha, and aversion, dvesha. In Jainism, the emphasis is on the purity of the soul. In the state of samsara, the soul is covered by karmic impurities that keep it trapped in the cycle of birth and rebirth. Only through rigorous spiritual discipline and the destruction of accumulated karma can the soul achieve liberation, known as kaivalya. Although the concept of samsara varies in details, the recognition of a perpetual existential cycle, guided by ignorance and the force of karma, is universal. It offers both an explanation for our existential condition and a guideline for transcending this condition. How the wheel works. For many spiritual seekers, trying to unravel the configuration of the Wheel of Samsara is like trying to understand the invisible gears of life. This endless cycle of birth and death is governed by precise and interconnected laws, the main one being the law of karma. Karma is a word that comes from Sanskrit and means action or act. However, in the spiritual context, karma is much deeper. It represents the relationship between a person's actions, their intentions, and the cyclical consequences that these actions generate. Simply put, every action we take, whether physical, mental, or emotional, creates a seed that bears fruit in future experiences. Thus, karma directly connects the life you are living now to the lives you have lived and those you will still live. It is, in many ways, the fuel that keeps the wheel turning. The Wheel of Samsara is fueled by 6 levels of existence, ranging from the subtle realms of pure bliss to the dense realms of extreme suffering. These levels of existence are known in Buddhist teachings as the 6 realms of rebirth. Let's explore them briefly. 1. Realm of the gods, devas, a state of pure pleasure and happiness. However, even the gods do not escape the cycle of samsara, as, upon exhausting their good karma, they also face rebirth. 2nd realm of the demigods, asuras, a plane of existence characterized by envy and conflicts. Although they have great power, the asuras are always restless and trapped in disputes. 3. Human realm, manushya. It is here that the greatest potential for liberation resides, as only in human form do we develop the self-awareness necessary to seek the truth. 4th, animal realm, tiryak, represents existence driven by instinct and survival. Being in this realm is living in a state of deep ignorance. 5th realm of hungry ghosts, preta, a state dominated by insatiable desire, symbolizing those who never find satisfaction, no matter how much they have. 6th hell realm, naraka, the densest and most painful realms where souls experience extreme suffering as a result of very negative actions. Each of these realms is not just an external place or literal dimensions. They can also be seen as internal states of mind and spirit. We don't need to literally be reborn as animals to experience the animal realm. We can observe instinctive and blind behaviors in our own current life. Furthermore, the transition between births, often referred to as the bardo in Tibetan Buddhism, is a critical stage in the cycle of samsara. In the state between death and rebirth, consciousness, still carried by its karmas, chooses a new body and a new life, continuing the cycle. Why we are trapped in the wheel. The most fundamental dynamic that keeps us trapped in the wheel of samsara is ignorance of the true nature of reality, the illusion of separation, that we are individual beings disconnected from the whole, creates a false sense of identity that we call ego. This ego struggles to protect its existence at all costs, generating endless desires and insurmountable fears. The 3 poisons described in Buddhism, ignorance, attachment, or desire, and aversion, are the cores of this samsaric prison. They operate together. Ignorance. We can imagine ignorance as the darkness that distorts reality. Without clarity about who we are and what the purpose of life is, our choices align with conditioned patterns, keeping us trapped in the cycle. Attachment. When we seek happiness in external things, we are controlled by desires. We crave wealth, relationships, status, and security, believing they are eternal and will bring fulfillment. The material world, however, is always impermanent. Aversion. We flee from suffering, avoid challenges, and deny aspects that would force us to confront reality. This denial only pushes us into more layers of illusion. Upon deep analysis, we realize how these forces shape every aspect of our existence in samsara, and it is only when we become aware of these dynamics and make efforts to transcend our limited perception that the door to liberation begins to open. To deeply understand the wheel of samsara and the mechanisms that keep us trapped in this endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, we need to delve into 2 key concepts: suffering and illusion. These 2 forces are the foundations that sustain samsara, like a prison built from our own misguided perception. However, we need to remember that these 2 elements exist from ignorance, from the lack of discernment about the true nature of existence. Only by recognizing the role of suffering and illusion in our lives can we begin to glimpse the path to liberation. Suffering, the mark of samsara. In the Buddhist tradition, suffering, or dukkha, is the first of the fundamental pillars of the 4 Noble Truths. The concept of dukkha is often translated as suffering, but the term carries a broader meaning, including dissatisfaction, discomfort, and the constant feeling of incompleteness that permeates the human experience. No matter how happy we may feel at certain moments in life, there is always a crack present, the sense that something is still missing, that our joy is transient and impermanent. This universal dissatisfaction is one of the signatures of samsara. The origin of suffering, as described by spiritual teachings, is our identification with impermanent things. Let's see this in detail. 1. The impermanence of all things, anitya. Anitya, or impermanence, is a fundamental principle that runs through all Eastern traditions. Everything in existence is in a constant state of change. Nothing is fixed or permanent. The things we love today may disappear tomorrow. Youth turns into old age. Health gives way to illness. Relationships so precious can end. Personal dreams can crumble. And even our body, the vehicle that carries our consciousness in this life, will eventually disintegrate. Suffering arises because we resist this universal truth. We try to cling to transient things as if they were eternal, creating a constant tension between our perception and reality. 2. Desire and attachment, tanha. The word tanha in Buddhism refers to the desire or thirst that continually draws our attention away from the present moment, projecting our happiness onto the external world. If only I could get this, I would be happy. We desire objects, experiences, people, and status because we believe these elements can fill the inner void. However, what we often forget is that every desire is insatiable. When we achieve the object we seek, new desires immediately arise. This infinite impulse is what moves the wheel of samsara. 3. Fear and aversion, devesha. Just as we desire what brings us pleasure, we flee from and fear what causes us pain or discomfort. Avoiding suffering is natural, but in samsara, this aversion amplifies our fear and the struggle for control. We reject aging, ignore our mortality, and resist inevitable events that are part of the flow of life. This resistance intensifies suffering, creating an endless cycle of fear and frustration. Moreover, suffering is amplified by the ego. The I, or the identity we believe to be, feels threatened whenever something shakes its position or danger of loss. We become inflexible, seeking security in a constantly moving reality. Thus, we continue living a life of continuous efforts to avoid inevitable sufferings and grasp pleasures that, in the end, cannot be sustained. Illusion, the veil of Maya. If suffering is the impact, illusion is the cause. The illusion, known as Maya in Hinduism, is the veil that distorts our perception of reality. Maya makes us believe that the phenomenal world, full of forms, names, and dualities, is the only and true reality. Under this influence, we become entangled in concepts like I and other, good and bad, gain and loss, without realizing that beyond these layers of duality, there is a deeper truth. The illusion of Maya is not just an intellectual blindness. It is a profound separation between our daily experience and what the sages refer to as the absolute truth. Here are some manifestations of Maya that sustain samsara. Identification with the ego. Maya convinces us that we are individual beings, separate from everything around us. This sense of individuality, although practical in the material world, creates the feeling of separation. I am different from you, we think. And this separation leads to comparison, competition, jealousy, pride, and fear. In the ultimate reality, all things are intrinsically interconnected, but under the veil of Maya, we cannot experience this unity. Belief in duality. Maya makes us see the world through the lens of duality, good and evil, light and darkness, joy and sadness. Although these polarities seem real, they are just aspects of the same coin. We cling to what we consider good and reject what we consider bad, forgetting that both are part of the divine plan and coexist in perfect harmony in the universal whole. Attachment to form. In samsara, we are so involved with finite forms, whether our body, our possessions, or our relationships, that we forget that these forms are temporary. We forget that, just as waves rise and fall in the ocean, forms are born and die. But the underlying substrate, the universal consciousness, remains unchanged. One of the great revelations that spiritual masters constantly highlight is that the illusion of Maya is not really external. It is not the world out there that is wrong or unsatisfactory, but rather how we perceive it. Thus, spiritual work often consists of removing our internal distortions so that the truth can emerge. The problem is not the existence of samsara, but the fact that we identify with it as if it were our only reality. Suffering and illusion, sustainers of the wheel. In the context of samsara, suffering and illusion are not separate forces, but rather feed each other. It is because of illusion that we experience suffering, and suffering, in turn, reaffirms the illusion. Let's examine how these two elements connect and keep the wheel of samsara in motion. 1. Belief in a fixed reality. When we place our faith in things that are impermanent, we inevitably face suffering. Even the greatest achievements in the material world, fame, power, wealth, relationships, are transient and can disappear at any moment. But illusion makes us believe that we can build a fixed reality outside ourselves. a permanent happiness in the external world. Repeatedly, we seek outside what can only be found within. 2. The cycle of desire and frustration. Under the influence of Maya, we seek pleasure and flee from pain in a constant cycle. When we achieve the object of desire, an achievement, a sensory pleasure, a relationship, etc., satisfaction is momentary, soon replaced by a new desire. When we are prevented from achieving our goals, frustration and suffering take over. Thus we spin endlessly in the giant wheel of samsara. 3. The depth of karma in illusion and suffering. The actions we take while blind by illusion generate karma, which in turn shapes our future experiences. This karma creates the fuel that keeps the wheel spinning, trapping us in cycles where we repeat the same patterns of suffering, driven by the same illusion. By the end of this chapter, we understand that suffering and illusion are not punishments, but tools of samsara that awaken us to something greater. They are reminders, though painful, that we are not living in harmony with the truth. In the next chapter, we will explore how to transcend these patterns, breaking the chains of samsara and moving towards liberation. Namaskaram, dear seeker of the truth. Having deeply understood the principles that sustain samsara, suffering and illusion, we can now turn our attention to something higher and more sublime, the path to liberation. This is the core of all great spiritual traditions, the ultimate destination of the journey in search of self-knowledge. No matter which path you follow, the quest for liberation consists of transcending the bonds of ignorance and the forces that bind us to the wheel of samsara. If samsara is characterized by an endless cycle of desire, attachment, and aversion, liberation, called moksha in Hinduism or nirvana in Buddhism, is the state of absolute freedom. It is the breaking of the chains that bind us to the cycle of birth and death, the encounter with our true nature, and the dissolution of duality. Understanding the meaning of liberation. Before we delve into the how, it is important to understand the what. What does it mean, after all, to be liberated from samsara? Often people imagine liberation as a state of permanent ecstasy or some kind of eternal paradise after death. However, spiritual masters insist that liberation is not an escape to another place, but rather a transcendence of the cyclical state of suffering and ignorance in which we are immersed. Liberation is the realization of the absolute truth, where you cease to identify with your physical form, personality, emotions, or thoughts, and recognize that your true nature is the infinite. In liberation, you live in harmony with the laws of the universe, free from accumulated karma and the limitations imposed by the mind. There are two fundamental truths in liberation. 1. The soul is immutable. At the heart of Eastern spirituality is the assertion that the essence of the soul, called Atman in Hinduism and consciousness in Buddhism, is never born, never dies, and is never touched by the changes of the phenomenal world. What is born and dies is the physical body, while the Atman remains as an eternal and silent witness. Recognizing this at a deep level is one of the first steps to being liberated from samsara. 2. The ultimate reality is unity, Advaita or Sunyata. The non-dualistic Advaita philosophies of Hinduism and the Mahayana schools of Buddhism, particularly the concept of sunyata, or emptiness, teach us that the separation between I and other, between subject and object, is illusory. Liberation occurs when we realize that all phenomena and all forms of existence are expressions of a single formless cosmic energy or a full void. If samsara is like waves in the ocean, liberation is realizing that we are the ocean, not the waves. Experiencing these truths directly is what takes us out of the cycle of birth and death. The path of spiritual traditions. Various spiritual traditions offer unique methods and practices to achieve liberation. Although the paths may vary, all share the goal of dissolving ignorance, overcoming attachment, and purifying karmic impurities. Here are some important approaches. The path of the Noble Eightfold Path, Buddhism. In the teachings of the Buddha, the path to liberation is clear and systematic. He offered the Noble Eightfold Path, which can be seen as an ethical, practical, and meditative guide to transcend suffering and achieve nirvana. Its 8 aspects can be grouped into 3 categories. 1. Wisdom, right view, understanding the 4 noble truths and seeing clearly the nature of reality. Right intention, cultivating thoughts of renunciation, compassion, and goodwill. 2. Ethical conduct, right speech, avoiding lies, gossip, and harmful speech. Right action, acting in ways that do not harm oneself or others, not killing, stealing, etc. Right livelihood, sustaining oneself through honest and non-harmful means. 3. Mental discipline, right effort, striving to purify the mind, eliminating negative states and cultivating positive ones. Right mindfulness, remaining present in the moment and observing the mind and body with clarity. Right concentration, developing deep states of meditation, samadhi, that lead to clarity and wisdom. Practicing the Noble Eightfold Path is a gradual process that purifies our actions, thoughts, and perceptions, leading us to the liberation from suffering. The path of yoga, Hinduism. In Hinduism, there are several paths that lead to liberation, each aligned with different types of temperaments and spiritual inclinations. The three main ones are: 1. Karma Yoga, path of selfless action. In this path, the practitioner performs their actions without the desire for reward or result. The idea is to detach from the fruits of work, seeing every task, big or small, as an offering to the divine. This dissolves the ego and burns accumulated karma. 2. Bhakti Yoga, path of devotion. This is the path of total surrender to the divine through devotion. The act of losing oneself in love for the divine dissolves the barriers imposed by the ego and creates space for transcendental union. Mantra, rituals, and chanting are common tools on this path. 3. Jnana Yoga, path of knowledge. This is the path of wisdom and discernment. The practitioner uses inquiries like, "Who am I?" to investigate the true nature of the self and dismantle the illusion of separation. This is a more philosophical and introspective path. Purification of karma. Liberation from samsara requires the purification of karma that keeps us trapped in the cycle of rebirth. It is said that karma is like a rope tied to us. Good actions create golden ropes, and bad actions create thorny ropes. However, both are still bonds. The key to transcending karma is performing actions with detachment, as proposed in karma yoga, or neutralizing negative impulses through meditation and selfless service. Essential practices for liberation. Regardless of the chosen path, there are universal practices that accompany all seriously committed spiritual seekers on the path to liberation. Here, we highlight 3. 1. Meditation, dhyana. Meditation is a powerful practice for observing and purifying the mind. During meditation, you can begin to see the illusion, maya, in which you live, and slowly dissolve the patterns of attachment and identification with the ego. Continuous meditation can lead to direct insights into your true nature. 2. The practice of mindfulness. In daily life, mindfulness helps you stay present in the moment and not react automatically to circumstances. A person who is not constantly trapped in thoughts of the past or future begins to experience reality with more clarity. 3. Total surrender, Ishvara Pranidhana. Many masters teach that ultimately, liberation can only happen when we stop trying to control life and completely surrender to the will of the divine or the greater order of the cosmos. This is not passivity, but absolute trust. The experience of liberation, moksha or nirvana, cannot be fully explained in words because it is beyond the mind and intellect. It is a state of indescribable peace and absolute freedom, where the seeker realizes that they were never truly a slave to samsara. It was just a mistaken perception. In this state, there is no more fear, desire, or separation. It is a return to home, to eternity. However, the most profound aspect of all this is that liberation is not something you achieve or conquer. It is not about adding something to your existence. It is, in fact, about removing the layers of ignorance that obscure reality. Liberation is the revelation of what you have always been. In contemporary esoteric and spiritual circles, there is a growing debate about a bold assertion that we are experiencing the final stage of samsara, the end of the cycle of reincarnations that has dominated human experience for thousands, perhaps millions of years. According to this view, the planet is transitioning to a higher level of existence, leaving behind the Wheel of Samsara and allowing this incarnation to be, for many, the last one needed before liberation. But is this possible? Has samsara, described by Eastern traditions as a cycle as ancient and immutable as time, finally come to an end? In this chapter, we will explore this idea deeply. We will consider its origin in the context of the planetary changes we are facing, analyze the evidence or philosophies that support such claims, and understand how these ideas align or clash with traditional knowledge. Additionally, we will examine what our stance should be in light of this possibility of living the last incarnation. The traditional view, samsara as an individual journey. Before we review the claims about the end of samsara, on a collective scale, we must remember that, historically, the cycle of samsara is portrayed in spiritual traditions as an individual journey, not a collective condition. In Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism, samsara is an experience lived by the individual soul or consciousness. Liberation from this wheel, whether called moksha or nirvana, is a path that each being must tread for themselves. No matter what happens in the external world, liberation depends exclusively on the level of wisdom, purity, and awakening of each individual. In this view, achieving liberation is not a global process, but rather an overcoming of personal ignorance that involves the ego and attachment to the false self. According to this perspective, even in eras of darkness or light, samsara does not end automatically for everyone. The wheel is impregnated with the accumulated karma of each being, and as long as this karma is not resolved, the soul remains trapped in the cycle, whether in material worlds like this one, or in subtle or dense dimensions. Therefore, from the traditional point of view, samsara only ends when each soul awakens, not through planetary evolution, but through individual inner transcendence. The New Age and the end of samsara. Despite the classical view that samsara is personal, many New Age spiritual currents argue that we are living in a unique moment in cosmic history. According to these beliefs, the Earth is undergoing a special period of transition, where its energetic vibration is rising to higher levels of consciousness. This is widely referred to as the entry into the Age of Aquarius, planetary awakening, or ascension to the fifth dimension. Some mediums, channelers, and spiritual authors suggest that this transformation is so profound that we are collectively ending the cycle of reincarnations on Earth. They claim that it will no longer be necessary to return to a plane of duality and suffering, because the planet would be transitioning from being a school for soul that need to learn through separation to becoming part of a new reality of unity and harmony. These views are generally based on some fundamental ideas. 1. Planetary transition. According to mystics and mediums, the Earth is changing its vibrational frequency to a new stage of existence. This transition would lead the planet from a third-dimensional state based on duality, fear, and suffering to a higher dimension where love, unity, and expanded consciousness will prevail. This would make it impossible for the wheel of samsara, fueled by lower densities of consciousness, to continue existing in this new environment. 2. The last incarnation. For many, it is said that this incarnation would be the last for the vast majority of souls incarnated here. What does this mean? Essentially, it would be the last opportunity to resolve karma and elevate consciousness to the point of transcending the cycle of death and rebirth. 3. Collective ascension. This idea holds that unlike the individual approach described by classical spiritual traditions, samsara can dissolve collectively in response to cosmic and planetary changes. The entire humanity would be called to make a quantum leap in its consciousness, aiding in the planetary ascension to higher levels of perception and experience. Evidence and questions. While these ideas are appealing, we must consider some questions from a logical and traditional approach. 1. Is the Earth truly evolving spiritually? Many argue that we are living in a moment of collective spiritual awakening. Practices like mindfulness, yoga, meditation, and spirituality are becoming increasingly mainstream. However, looking at the world, we also live in times of deep challenges, conflicts, environmental destruction, inequality, and other symptoms of collective ignorance. These facts can be seen as part of a purification, but they also suggest that humanity still has a long way to go in terms of ego transcendence. 2. Are all souls ready? The idea that all of humanity is ready to leave samsara seems inconsistent with reality. souls incarnated at various stages of evolution coexist on Earth. From those more mature, actively seeking enlightenment, to those still completely immersed in the desires, attachments, and illusions of materialism. 3. Is collective ascension realistic? Spiritual traditions warn that even in worlds or eras considered more enlightened, there are still souls learning basic lessons about karma and unity. The planetary environment changes, but not everyone awakens at the same time. Thus, even if the Earth is transitioning, samsara may continue to exist for those not yet ready to transcend. 4. Can karma be erased? A soul does not transcend samsara without fully resolving its karma. According to the universal law, every action generates a reaction, and this reaction must be experienced for the soul to fully recognize its choices and consequences. There are no shortcuts to spiritual evolution. Regarding these questions, we realize that the idea of the end of the Wheel of Samsara is not as simple as it seems. If we are indeed living a planetary transition, as many claim, it is likely that this change impacts more the souls ready for awakening than those still entangled in ignorance. In other words, the world may be changing, but the spiritual journey remains an individual responsibility. The role of individual consciousness in collective transformation. Regardless of whether we are living the end of samsara or not, there is an undeniable truth. Individual consciousness is the key to liberation. Planetary or collective transformation, if it is indeed occurring, is the aggregated result of the inner work of each human being. It is not about waiting for something external to save or liberate us, but rather taking responsibility for our own karma, conditioning, and evolution. What difference would it make if the Earth were ascending to a new level of consciousness, but you remained attached to the illusions that shape samsara? The external context may change, but liberation is a choice of the seeker. Similarly, even if the planet is still experiencing duality, your consciousness can transcend samsara now. The creation of your reality is internal. The end of samsara, truth or illusion? Has samsara come to an end? Such an answer is uncertain, as it varies according to belief and perspective. For those who believe we are living a planetary transition, there may be a genuine desire for change and a pointing towards more harmonious times. But for souls still trapped in ignorance and attachment, samsara will continue to turn until its lesson is learned. As seekers, the best approach is not to depend on external circumstances or collective prophecies to justify our path. Remember, the only thing that truly matters is the sincere effort to know oneself, purify oneself, and transcend illusion. As spiritual masters often say, if this is your last incarnation or not, live as if it were. Join the change, but choose to be the center of it. After all, the true liberation from the Wheel of Samsara is not out there. It begins here, now, within you. Thanks for watching.